Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now then, we have actual rugby to discuss. The Pro 14 returned over the weekend. Irish eyes very much focused on the Aviva Stadium. On Saturday evening, Leinster came out on top against Munster. It was 27 points to 25. And then yesterday, Connacht, who effectively have spent all this time training and prepping for just 2 games before wrapping up again, were comfortable winners over Ulster. Bonus point win, 26 points to 20. We have former Irish captain and line Keith Wood with us. Evening, Keith.
How are you, Joe?
Great to have you with us. And we have the Irish Independent's Rory O'Connor, who was at the game. Rory, we had fake crowd noise on the television. We had no option for the empty stadium experience. What was it all like?
Very strange, Joe. It was I was one of the lucky 20 journalists who were allowed in after the government changed the way that the kind of behind closed doors would work early last week. And from the moment you got there and, was able to park outside the Aviva Stadium, was able to, had the queue for get a temperature test, which was pretty stressful going in. Got stuck behind the 2 ambulance crews. So I was there for ages, kind of sweating and hoping I wasn't sweating too much because, you didn't want to get thrown out again. But then you walk into the stadium and walk up to the press box and, there was music playing when, for the hour beforehand. But when Munster came out into the pitch, that music stopped. And they just emerged in complete silence with the sound of one person clapping. And it was just so weird. They turned the music back on for Leinster, so it was obviously a hometown decision. And Connacht, who were the designated home team, did the same on Sunday. And then once it kicked off, it was a better game than I was expecting. And what the real joy of it was, but aside from the fact that it was just live sport again, was the noise that was coming out off the pitch and being able, that unique thing of being able to hear what the players are doing on the pitch. I think Keith said it last week. The noise levels from the players, to hear James Lowe organising a Leinster defence when they're under pressure from Munster, to hear Craig Casey, the young scrum half, barking at the team even though he wasn't on the pitch yet, to hear Bundy Aki getting stuck in and he's the most vocal player I picked up on the weekend. The way Leinster celebrated that choke tackle when Johnny Sexton turned over Chris Farrell, those little moments that I'd never been able to hear before, because obviously usually it's a raucous arena. You'd prefer it with fans in there, obviously. But and hopefully sooner rather than later there will be some form of attendance. But it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. It was very different. It was very felt pretty privileged to be there, and it's great to have rugby back.
Keith, in some respects, the lingering image is R.G. Snyman limping off after 7-8 minutes. Van Graan talked about it. He said that Snyman stole that line out. It went from absolute athleticism in the air to despair, literally half a second later. I suspect there is a degree of despair here.
Yeah, I think there has to be. When there's I think the hopes of supporters, players, administrators, everybody alike, is that these the 2 guys, the 2 South Africans, Allende and Snyman, would come in and do great things and help kickstart Munster back into winning ways. I think that is the view that's been on them. It's a fairly hefty expectation. But 7 minutes later, and suddenly that just doesn't feel as quite as nice. And seeing Kilcoyne going off at the same time, Munster have been looking to try and have people to share the load with CJ Stander with carrying, and the 2 other carriers in the pack were both off within the first 10 minutes. So I was deflated by it because for him as a young man, it's hard because he's gone to the other side of the world to go and do a job, and he wants to be able to deliver for his employers and for his team, and he hasn't really got to know his team fully yet, and he's already off the field. So I don't quite know exactly what the story is in terms of the injury, but there was a lot of negative noises came out on the back of it very, very quickly. So that doesn't augur very well.
No, it doesn't. He's having an MRI scan this afternoon, as we understand it. But the noises, as you say, Keith, weren't good. As for the overview of the game, Rory, so 27 points to 25, 3 tries to 3. It was Healy, Ringrose, James Lowe. It was Andrew Conway, it was Keith Earls, and then Andrew Conway again. A missed conversion really was the only difference. It had seemed at one point in the game, maybe just after half-time when James Lowe scored that try at 24-13, it was dead and gone. Munster rallied.
They did, and I think firstly, I think you have to pay tribute to all the players for the condition they came back in and the quality of play that they were able to produce. I know they struggled with the breakdown interpretations a little bit, and there was a few handling errors along the way, but really the quality on show was quite remarkable, given that they hadn't played in almost 6 months. So yeah, the way it went, it was like Munster were really unlucky, I thought, and could maybe not unlucky, maybe they reaped what they sowed a little bit, but they didn't take the chances that they created during that first 38 minutes. They were very impressive at times, and they negated a lot of Leinster strengths. They gave Saracens pretty much a template to work off in a couple of weeks' time. One that I'm sure they'll try and work off themselves in 2 weeks, when probably they will play Leinster in a semi-final. They cleaned them out in the air, both out of touch and from Conor Murray's excellent box kicking. Andrew Conway gave Jordan Larmour sleepless nights, and Jordan Larmour's got a bit of proving himself to do from here on in. And yes, Leinster were just a more clinical team, and Munster got ahead. Then Leinster got 2 tries from the opportunities that they created for themselves. Really impressive, even though unlimited opportunity. But even when Leinster threatened to pull away with that wonderful try that started with Sexton forcing that choke tackle turnover you mentioned earlier off Chris Farrell, and then moving the ball blind through Ryan Baird's hands and that lovely delivery, and it just seemed at that stage that Munster could easily drop their heads. I thought they rallied really well. I thought they created some really lovely opportunities through some good play, and were unlucky that JJ Hanrahan's fairly reliable boot let him down with a very, very tough kick towards the end. I know there's a bit, Leo Cullen questioned why Craig Casey got the ball off the pitch at the end, but I suppose in the real politic of it all, Munster needed 2 points to qualify for a semi-final, and had to go the length of the pitch to get anything more than that. It was probably more likely that they caused a turnover, and the try would have lost them that point. So, it was probably more a pragmatic kind of decision based on fatigue than anything else. But given the way who they were playing, given the fact that they lost 2 key players early on in such disappointing circumstances, and the fact that they've been off for so long, there was a lot for Munster to like coming out of it, even though it was kind of the same old story on the results page. And there's a few things like consecutive penalties just before half time where Leinster got on top, that they'll really feel that they thought they'd moved on from that sort of thing. But there was a lot to be cheerful for them, and then Leinster can be happy that even though they were found out in a couple of areas, which is unlike them, they were still able to get the result. And you'd imagine that they'll be the better for someone having shown them where their weaknesses are.
Keith, what were your overall impressions?
Well, I went into the game with no real expectations for quality, actually, and I thought we did get an awful lot of quality, and there were mistakes. I got frustrated with the handling, forwards handling, mostly Munster, I think, in the second half. That kind of annoyed me a fair bit. I was annoyed by little bits and bobs, but I had an expectation of it being an error-strewn game, and so I was pleasantly surprised by it. There's been little to no contact done. I know Munster and Peter Manny was talking that they were limited to a very few number of minutes, which it doesn't fit very well in terms of player welfare, but the reality of the situation with COVID has made it be as such. But with very little contact played, there were going to be a huge amount of errors, and there were far less than I thought there were going to be. I thought Munster looked good. I would have felt that when you have someone like Allende and everybody's expecting him to crash the ball up in the centre, let's not disappoint them. Let's give them that. And that didn't really happen enough. I thought we saw more of that from Farrell. I thought it was a fantastic game. But I would have used Route 1 from one of the best players in the world at that. So I would have let that happen, and to test the mettle of the 10 and 12 axis for Leinster. But other than that, I thought Munster had to fight very hard for its scores, and Leinster didn't. And for me, that was the 10, 15, 20 phases for Munster to get a score, and then Leinster would go down and either pick up a simple penalty, kick into the corner, and bundle it over from there. That made it more difficult viewing. And yet, I didn't think there was any fear of Munster dropping their heads, because all they wanted to do was to be back onto a field. And I thought some players played really, really well on both sides. And it was a bloody good game. When you looked at it in contrast to some of the rugby that was shown in the Premiership, and I got to see highlights of some of that, and even the highlights weren't great. So look, I'm happy enough. I have no real big expectation for the first couple of weeks. It's incredibly difficult for players to go and, yes, they're going to be put under pressure in training, but the level of error comes up when the level of contact goes up. And that was full bore contact with no prep, which is pretty impressive, actually.
As Keith mentioned, Rory, Chris Farrell was very good. He was given man of the match by Liam Toland, actually, on Air Sport. Aside from his dunt on Sexton on 18 minutes, what else did we see from Allende?
I thought he showed, he was bedding into a new system, so I don't think we saw the full package from him. But I did think there was a couple of nice touches with the ball in hand. He did get physical. He got amongst it. I think they did have a bit of a plan to unsettle Johnny Sexton. I guess it worked for them in December 2018. There's obviously other teams have tried it, so why not? Because CJ Stander, who I thought was absolutely outstanding, made a beeline for him off the back of the scrum a couple of times. I don't think we saw the full Allende package, but I thought it was a decent debut, all things considered. And I think there's a lot more to come from him. And I wonder if they knew, knowing that he hadn't been part of the setup for a little while, knowing that they're playing Leinster in 2 weeks' time, they didn't want to show all of their weapons. And I think maybe having him alongside him released Farrell to be able to be the player that he was as well. He very much, when he did carry, he carried very effectively. He almost got over the line just before Andrew Conway's first try. And I think it's going to take him a little while to bed in. He missed a lot of training because he came over injured. I don't know how Munster are going to approach this week, because they do need that 1 point against Connacht, but they have a 6-day, or they have a 7-day, they have an 8-day turnaround. Sorry, they're playing on Sunday, but then they have another short turnaround to a semi-final. So whether he'll get another run out this weekend to kind of build on that, or whether they'll hang on to him for the semi-final, remains to be seen. Yeah,
you do, Keith, feel there's a hell of a player in Chris Farrell if he can get a decent run. This is a guy getting man of the matches for Ireland back in 2018, and again, there's just times where he looks fantastic, and again at the weekend, the impact he has for Munster is absolutely massive.
Well, it is. I think Munster are within their backline. They're trying to find what their backline is, and if you'd go to everybody being fit, you'd have Joey Carberry there at 10, which was, for his fast feet, for his pure gas that he has as a 10, could open up an awful lot of space for big guys outside him. So you think that would make it very hard. I thought JJ played pretty well. I thought Connor played pretty well. But the star show was Farrell, and the space that was given for the guys outside. And when you expect to see Leinster almost going away from the game, Munster started doing that at the end to fight their way back to get into kicking distance of a draw. And but I love Farrell. He's big, he's very, very big, but he's always looking to offload with the ball. Munster need to get it into their head that if their big guys get over the gain line and get a hand free, that there is always somebody on that shoulder. And that isn't something that Munster have done for quite a number of years, and it needs to fit into it, because there's no point just having them to hit and go to ground. These guys have too much quality for that. So you need to be the poacher on the shoulder. So in that instance, you're going to have Keith Earls trying to take a beeline, a positive line for if he can slip his hands around the back and to see where he can get to. And that's what the change will happen. So the chance of having big guys that can have an impact on the game, and it isn't just bustling guys out of the way, it is about trying to play them into the game. If Munster want to progress, they need to not take it for granted that these guys do one part of the job. Other players have to get in on the act as well.
Rory, on JJ Hanrahan, the general consensus is he had a very good game. The cruelty of his position, and it ties in almost with that game against Racing, the draw back in November, where he also had a very good game and missed the drop goal at the end, and on Saturday misses the kick after missing nothing throughout the game, but misses the kick to level the game. Those are the moments, I suppose, when you're trying to pitch in and say, I'm ready to take on this jersey, especially under the circumstances of Joey Carberry's indefinite absence, as Munster termed it. Those are the moments you'd love to see him getting in the habit of seizing.
Yeah, there was one line from Johan van Graan when he was discussing JJ Hanrahan after the game that kind of probably exposed how indefinite that period is going to be. He said, JJ's going to be our out half for a very long time. So JJ Hanrahan now has the time and space in a very pressurised environment to make that jersey his own. And he was good at the weekend. He did an awful lot right. I think he had a really good hand in all 3 tries. But that kick did go astray. And if you're going to be at elite level out half, you've got to nail those. And also the Devon Toner intercept came from JJ's pass. You know, I know he was trying to push the game. He was trying to win the game for his team. But, there's still those little things go against him from time to time that make you wonder whether he's just that shelf below where, obviously Johnny Sexton is the former World Player of the Year. It's possibly unfair to compare them, but that's where Munster want to be. Munster want to be the best team in Europe. They want to be the best team in the Pro 14. And, for all the good things that he did, he's got to just get to that consistent level where those kind of key errors are cut out. And he's not there yet, but I do think the time in the jersey this season has done him well. I think his confidence is up and he's doing an awful lot right, and he's surrounded by an awful lot of quality there. But yeah, I'd say he was like, he probably had a bit of deja vu from that Racing game again, and he'll be kicking himself. But, he'll get a lot of opportunities now to kind of iron those creases out. I don't think he'll, injury permitting, I don't think he'll have the excuse that he never got a chance this time around. They're going to have to, they've been forced to give him that chance, and he's got to prove that he's up to it.
Keith, the 3 of us spoke last Monday and we were wondering about Carberry, and then the news came through on Tuesday of his indefinite absence, and you just think, wow, this is getting very serious now. It was dreadful news for him and I suspect for everybody concerned with Munster. On Hanrahan, where is he and where does he need to get to, and do you think he is capable of getting there? What does he need to sort out? Well,
I think if he isn't vying with somebody for the jersey, if it is his jersey now, he needs to stand into it, and I'm going to say almost tailor-make his game so that he continually builds with confidence. So he doesn't force too many things. At one stage in the game, he forced his hands a little bit and it became a half-forward pass to Farrell, who knocked on. It was just a little bit of uncertainty for him. He needs to strut his stuff as a 10. All 10s are cocky. They have to be. There's no point having humility as a 10. You need to be there to deliver for your team. You have to take control, whether you want to or not. You have to not force the game, but you have to force your will on the game. So he needs to trust the parts of his game that are absolutely excellent and just make those flow. That's the way I would put it. I think he's a very good player. But Munster have been looking for a match winner, kicking 10 who manages the game, takes control of it, a la Ronan O'Gara, ever since Ronan O'Gara. So, that's been part of the issue, because you're being compared to guys who've delivered on an international stage for sort of 14 or 15 years and still cast quite a shadow. So his job is to be the best 10 he can be for Munster. And he has to not worry about anything else. He doesn't need to be flash, he doesn't need to be anything else, but he has to impose his will on the game. And so I thought he played pretty well, but I didn't think he imposed himself enough on it. And it's funny when you watch what happens exactly inside him then when Conor Murray is playing, Craig Casey is playing, because I know that'll be somebody that people would want to talk about, because Craig Casey just zipped the ball immediately when he came on. But there's no thought process for Craig Casey. He's a young kid who comes in and he is fast and he is furtive, and that's the sort of scrum half he is. But he is looking to sling the ball. So he's not having to have any management of the game. It's kind of that joy of youth. Whereas you can almost see Conor being a little bit at times ponderous, trying to orchestrate what's happening. I think if JJ takes up that lead and starts demanding, starts taking over as a 10, then he can fill the jersey an awful lot better.
Yeah, it's probably a difficult thing, I would suspect, for him to take over with Murray there. You feel Murray need to quicken things up as well then, obviously?
Well, I think I thought Murray played well, by the way, and it's funny because I read through a lot of the press as well afterwards. I thought he had a very good game. I got frustrated a couple of times. Munster went back to having 3 forwards standing up, slow it down, pop it out to them. I just don't like that style of play, and I don't think it suits Munster to do it. So when people, those guys calling for Murray's head, I don't believe that, actually, but I do think he needs to he needs to trust his 10 more. And he needs to, there's a guy who's able to stand and see what's happening around him an awful lot more, and he has more time to be able to view it. That's the nature of a 10. They tend to control the game an awful lot more. I just think that's where the speed will come. Okay. So Murray needs to not be thinking, what should he be doing? I think he should be hitting his 10, and 10 he should be bossing the game.
I mean, look no further, Rory, than Johnny Sexton. Our 35-year-old pitched up in very good shape, you'd have to say.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when you consider his last game was that disaster in Twickenham, and he spoke about it afterwards, about how it's been basically living with him ever since, which you'd feel for his wife Laura and the kids if that's the case. He
just 3 or 4 times a day, nothing excessive.
Yeah, he was excellent, and it's getting that consistency out of him. I mean, we know how good he can be, and we know how good he has been. I think the concern at the age that he's at is whether he's going to be still able to do that on a consistent basis for the next 2 or 3 years, because it looks like the way Joey Carbery's injuries are and how far he seems to be away from everyone else in the pecking order, Ireland and Leinster are both going to be relying on him in that regard. It was interesting listening to Brian O'Driscoll talking about him on Friday and talking up Harry Byrne as maybe the guy who's going to come on and eventually push him out of that number 10 jersey. But right now, that's not happening. He's very much the main man, and to see him dominate that, like CJ Stander went after him big time every time he got the ball. It was really one thing I loved about the game was the amount of times CJ Stander and Jack Conan picked off the base of a scrum and just took off. I mean, that doesn't happen that much anymore, and it was lovely. It's one of my favourite parts of rugby, and CJ Stander picked up the ball, and all he wanted to do was head for Johnny Sexton, and Sexton stood up to those. He needed a bit of treatment, but when Chris Farrell went after him in the second half, he was able to turn the ball over, and from that scrum, he just had that beautiful deft touch that released Ryan Baird for that try, for that James Lowe try. And also, I thought, he spoke about it after the game as well, the way he varied the kicking game, the way Leinster varied their kicking game across the board for Robbie Henshaw's try. Very like England in the Six Nations. They're learning. They've picked bits off that English performance. They've seen the way England have been dissecting teams. They've watched what's going on in New Zealand in terms of the way the game is evolving. And he's a beautiful kicker of the ball. He's well able to do it. Even I was listening to Owen Toolan on the 42 podcast this morning, and he pointed out the similarities between the time Sexton chipped in behind and Conway wasn't able to deal with it, and Chris Farrell had to touch. I think it was Farrell had to touch the ball down over his own line. It was very like that try against England when Sexton couldn't deal with the ball and England got in for the try. I can't remember who scored it now. But it was kind of a mirror image of that. There was almost, there was elements of that England game that they were able to replace in their own good. So yeah, he's in great nick. He's in for a bit of a relentless ride in the next 6 months. So we're going to learn an awful lot about how robust his body is and how at 35, because he's not going to get much of a rest. But it looks like he's locked down well, and the experience will do him some good.
Keith, there was always going to be a degree of attention on Andrew Brace and his interpretation of the breakdown. I know Johnny Sexton used the word chaos at one stage, very stop-start. Leo Cullen referenced it as well. What was going on there?
Yeah, I'd love to give some insight into that, because I was very frustrated watching it as well. And it was funny, in the first couple of weeks of New Zealand back playing rugby, there was penalties left, right and centre, because the new normal for ruck time was just showing confusion, because it's still kind of mid-season, even though it's off-season or off post-COVID, but the players are taking a long time to get used to it. I was looking at some of them saying, I can't see why that's a penalty, and I'm trying to get used to the referee's interpretation on it as well. But as it turned out, yes, there was a lot of penalties. What I really liked from it was there wasn't a lot of dissension in relation to it. There's an understanding, I think, that this is difficult for everybody, and this is having to try and get guys up to speed very, very quickly. Normally you've 2 or 3 matches to figure that out. Now you don't. You're playing in a very big match, one of the major matches on the Irish rugby calendar. And look, I thought it was a bit frustrating. I'm not sure of some of them. I was doubting, but I wasn't looking at it saying, "Oh, he's having a dreadful game." But I just think it's difficult. And I just want to pick on one point before we talk about and Johnny Sexton being 35, playing very well, or full of confidence, wanting to play forever, which he has said, which is one of those interesting concepts to have. He won't play forever if he starts tackling as he did in the first 5 minutes of the game, he needs to get his head lower. He needs to tackle lower. And I know that gave a turnover against Farrell later on, and I think that was a big turning point for it. But as I would say all the time, I want him on the field at the start and on the field at the end, if at all possible. And guys will run at him and target him. It isn't just targeting Johnny. The number 8, the way the game has changed slightly again, is number 8 has a better opportunity to make contact with the opposition 10. So that's going to happen, and it's going to happen a lot.
I think that ship has sailed. Even that, remember that tackle with Bastereau how many years ago now? I don't think he's returning on that one, Keith.
No, I don't think he is, but it won't stop us continually saying it just to annoy him.
Rory, give us some realistic expectations then for 21-year-old Ryan Baird.
Oh, well, I mean, it's like the world's his oyster. He looks like he's James Ryan 2.0, and that's not putting too much pressure on his shoulders. I think he's following the same path. He went to the same school. He was very, very good for Ireland under 20s. He probably, his athletic profile would suggest that he's capable of doing a lot of the things that James Ryan can do. He has the handling ability. He has the confidence. Like, he dropped the ball when he was first given it after 2 or 3 minutes, and it didn't bother him. He pulled off a couple of really extraordinary pieces of skill. He did, I think he needs to learn how to run the senior team's line out a bit better, and that's something that was a massive responsibility on his shoulders in tandem with another young St. Michael's kid, Ronan Kelleher. And it's something that went drastically wrong. So I wouldn't give him, he has a lot to work on to get to that level. But I think he's a very gifted young man with a huge amount of potential, and Leinster are fully confident in his ability to make it. And I think, having given him the dry run last weekend, he's now proven himself capable of mixing it with some of the best players around. And I think he's got a big role to play for Leinster in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Connacht 26, Ulster 20 then. 2 tries in each half for Connacht. By dint of Glasgow the night before, Ulster went into this game knowing they were already through to a semi-final where they'll play Edinburgh. They thought they would need 2 points from 2 games at the outset of this mini-series. And Dan McFarlane, Keith, wasn't overly impressed. He said it was disappointing to put out that kind of performance in any game, but especially when we're playing an Interpro. I don't want to take anything away from Connacht, but that was a shadow of our normal selves. He clearly feels they didn't pitch up. Connacht did, and they took a bonus point. Yeah,
I think he made a comment that their attitude had stemmed from the sofa on the previous day. I think that was the line, something like that. It was an interesting comment to make. Also interesting from Ulster to not try and fly out of the blocks. I mean, the opportunity to play when you don't have a huge amount of pressure happens rarely in rugby. And you do want to try and take that to see if you can push things a little bit more. But they were flat and didn't quite seem to have... you can't say that they didn't have the interest. All these guys want to do is play rugby, but they didn't quite get to the pitch of the game at all. Whereas, in contrast, Connacht were sharp, energetic, vocal. They were playing for something, and they weren't really. So that's it's kind of interesting. For me, there's something that I've loved about Connacht for the last number of years, ever since Pat Lam came in. I know that a hiccup since then, but they seem to have got it back again. They're one of the teams that play with joy and freedom, and I think those guys have to be enjoying themselves. They look like they are. They're having a cut at all at every single stage. They want to be able to try something a little bit different. I thought Jack Carty had a great game, by the way. I just thought he just looked like he looked beaten down after the World Cup, and he now doesn't. And that's a good place to have him.
Yeah. It's rare, Rory, that you get to watch 2 games in perfect lab conditions. Atmosphere exactly the same, stadium exactly the same. How did the flavour and intensity of this 80 minutes compare to what you saw the night before?
Even when the teams arrived at the stadium, Munster and Leinster kept themselves very much socially distant before the game, whereas Connacht and Ulster came onto the pitch before their kind of warm-ups, laughing and joking amongst themselves. It was much more pre-season-y feel. I thought that reflected a little bit in the intensity of the game, albeit Connacht got it right once the whistle went. You know, I thought they brought a real physical edge and a real energy. And as I said earlier, being able to hear the players on the pitch, like Connacht are a loud team. Whereas Ulster, you know, I just don't think Ulster have made massive improvements under Damian Farrell, but they're still not good enough to not turn up and get a result. You know, they got to still bring an awful lot. So I was really impressed by Connacht. I mean, I think one thing Andy Farrell has probably done well is because they have this weird scenario where they've got 2 games and then they're off till October. He's told them 15 of you are playing this week and 15 of you are playing next week. So those guys probably won't, you know, some of them might be on the bench this week, but like most of them won't have another game until October. So that was their chance to impress Andy Farrell. That was their chance to impress Andy Friend. And when you see the way Ulton Delan played, I thought Gavin Thornbury before his concussion was really, really excellent. You know, he's a really unheralded player in the Connacht setup. And then Bundy Aki, you know, 4 of the players took a knee before the game. He was one of them, and you know, he took a bit of a stand there, and then he never took a backward step the whole way through the game. I was so impressed with the way he played. From minute 1, he just set the tempo. He's just that talisman for Connacht. It's a bit of a cliche at this stage, but like, what a signing. That was his 100th appearance for Connacht. You know, pound for pound, there can't be many players who've contributed as much, having been brought in from outside, both to Connacht and Ireland. I thought he was really, really outstanding. And he set that, whatever like laughs and jokes were going on in the warm-up, you know, once they got out there, he set that tone physically from the start. And, you know, they played off his energy and brought some lovely stuff around them. Kieran Marmion, another one who was excellent. John Porch, the Aussie Sevens player who's become a really important player for them, was very good. You know, you couldn't help but be impressed by the way they went about it.
Yeah, Marmion took his World Cup omission very badly by all accounts, so maybe he's had a bit of time to go away and lick his wounds and is going to come back in a big way, because, I mean, geez, he was in flying form for such a long time. Keith, before you go, so Stockdale was back as well. He is the hair shorn. So between Stockdale, Earls scored, Conway scored twice, Lowe scored. Give me your 2 there.
Yeah, I would say Stockdale was looking gorgeous with his bald head. Yeah, that's about right. Well, he's either very hairy or bald now. That's what it is. So it's a kind of interesting twist. I thought Earl's finish was phenomenal. Yeah. He got himself into a perfect position to be able to do it. Kept his balance for it. Conway has been playing incredibly well. He just he is. For the whole of last season, he was just putting his hand up. I thought he was very good. Stockdale still has an awful lot to do. I thought Larmour was, for me, was uncomfortable at 15. And look, the laws, not the laws, they haven't changed, but they have been viewed differently. There's a lot of interference on high balls now. That didn't happen 3 or 4 years ago. It was automatically penalised. Now it's not penalised at all, I think, for safety reasons. I think they're protecting the guy who goes up in the air, but he never got to the ball at any stage. He was jumping, and it was 3 or 4 yards ahead of him. So he was... Munster exploited that often. Actually, Munster's kicking game was pretty decent as well. So for me, the 2 wingers were the 2 Munster wingers, and they got the opportunity to score.
Rory mentioned that about Larmour earlier on, Keith. You don't want to be an international fullback with a reputation for being uncomfortable under the high ball. You need to just get on top of that.
You do, but no, he's taking over from a guy who was the safest pair of hands for a high ball of all time in Rob Kearney. So he doesn't want to. He absolutely doesn't want to get into that position. And I'm uncertain yet about Stockdale at 15. But these are young guys, and we need a guy to come through to take over the 15 jersey. I thought Shane Daly did very well, though he wasn't tested anywhere near as much as Larmour.
Rory, when it all comes out in the wash, who'll end up being the go-to 15 over the next 5, 6, 7 years?
Well, I think in the next 5, 6, 7 weeks, it might be Rob Kearney for Leinster, because his brother got injured. They don't have a huge amount of resources and in that area because of a couple of different injuries. And Kearney's on a short-term deal to the end of the season and may end up getting the final farewell that his career possibly deserves. They might shift Larmour to 14. Long-term, I would say Andy Farrell is having a bit of an influence in getting Stockdale to 15. I think he wants to see what he's like there. Probably didn't get much of the kind of test that like Larmour got really targeted. But that says a lot about where Munster thought Leinster had vulnerabilities. Yeah, I think Larmour gives you too much in the attacking side to ignore. I think he can be Ireland's a version of Christian Cullen for Ireland. But he's got to sort that part of his game out. He's had good games, like he started the Scotland game in the World Cup. He's had good games for Ireland in that position. He's had good games for Leinster in that position, but he's got to get it consistently right. It's a difficult skill. I do think Lowe will have an influence when he comes in, but I thought Conway and Earls definitely, as Keith said, and did everything they could to hang on to that jersey.
Okay, fellas, we'll leave it there. Excellent stuff. We had Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent, and we had former Irish captain Keith Wood as well. Thanks, gents.
Cheers.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.